Hello everyone, I'm Peter. The photo you are now seeing was taken by a NASA Mars rover. It's an actual image of the Martian surface. It looks quite similar to some regions on Earth. In this video, we will follow the perspective of the Mars rover to see what it feels like to stand on the surface of Mars. Mars is the fourth planet in the solar system. Its orbit is outside of Earth's orbit. The average distance from Mars to Earth is approximately 225 million kilometers, which is about 600 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. But in reality, because Earth and Mars orbit at different speeds, the distance between them is constantly changing. During a Mars opposition, when it is closest to Earth, the distance is only about 55 million kilometers. At its farthest, it can be up to 400 million kilometers away. It takes Mars 687 Earth days to orbit the Sun, which is nearly 2 Earth years. This is known as a Martian year. However, a day on Mars is quite similar to a day on Earth, lasting about 24 hours and 39 minutes. The diameter of Mars is about 6,792 kilometers, only half that of Earth, making it the second smallest planet in the solar system. Its mass is about 1/9 of Earth's, and its surface gravity is about 38% of Earth's. Its surface area is equivalent to the total land area of Earth. Furthermore, as we've mentioned before, seasons are caused by the tilt of the planet's rotational axis. Mars's axial tilt is about 25.19 degrees, which is very close to Earth's 23.5 degrees. Therefore, Mars also experiences spring, summer, autumn,
just
and
like
winter.
Earth.
However, because Mars takes nearly 2 years to orbit the Sun, each season on Mars is about twice as long as on Earth. In ancient times, both Eastern and Western cultures considered Mars to be an inauspicious star. So what was so ominous about Mars? It's actually related to its color. As you can see, Mars is one of the few celestial bodies in the night sky that glows red. People at that time did not know why Mars was red, so they considered it ominous. But modern science can easily explain it. The soil on the Martian surface contains a large amount of iron oxide, so its surface primarily appears reddish-orange. However, it wasn't until the invention of the telescope that people's perception of Mars changed. In November 1659, Dutch astronomer Christian Huygens, while observing Mars, drew several sketches of its surface. One of them featured a pattern shaped like an hourglass. Huygens named it the Hourglass Sea, thinking this area might be an ocean or a green space. In reality, this area is what we now call Syrtis Major Planum, a basaltic plain with a diameter of over 1,300 kilometers. We can't fault Huygens' drawing skills. Given the observational technology at the time, being able to depict features of the Martian surface was already quite an achievement. Later, by the end of the 17th century, using his improved telescope, Huygens discovered large white spots at Mars's north and south poles. Huygens called them polar caps at the time. These are, in fact, the ice caps of Mars. By the 18th century, astronomers could accurately measure Mars's size, rotation period, and axial tilt. They even discovered that Mars has an atmosphere, clouds, and seasonal changes similar to Earth's, making it seem very much like our planet. By the mid to late 19th century, the resolution of telescopes had improved, allowing astronomers to see the Martian landscape in greater detail. One of the most famous figures from this period was the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli. On the surface of Mars, he discovered some dark lines. Some of these lines were up to 120 kilometers wide and over 4,800 kilometers long. He speculated that these might be streams or rivers on Mars, so in Italian, he named these lines canali. However, when this was later translated into English, the word was mistranslated as canals. This caused quite a stir to Westerners at the time. Canals were man-made structures. Could this mean there was intelligent life on Mars? Many people began to speculate that there might be Martians on Mars, that they had their own civilization, and had even built cities. This idea was further popularized thanks to one person, the American astronomer and mathematician Percival Lowell. In 1894, Lowell, through his telescope, also saw the lines that Schiaparelli had described. He was firmly convinced that these were artificially constructed canals. So he wrote a book in which he stated that the Martian civilization was more advanced than Earth's because they could build such a massive irrigation system. He claimed they not only dug canals, but also used them as oases for agriculture. So it was his book that made the term Martian a household name. In 1897, an author named H.G. Wells published a science fiction novel related to Mars called The War of the Worlds. This War of the Worlds wasn't about World War I or II, but rather told the story of a Martian invasion of Earth. The Martians in this novel possessed intelligence and advanced weaponry far beyond that of humans, because Mars's gravity is much weaker than Earth's. The Martians depicted in the book had very thin legs, like these long-legged, octopus-like creatures. They were highly intelligent, so their heads were very large. In 1938, this novel was adapted into a radio drama and broadcast in the United States. At the time, many Americans believed it was real, that aliens were really attacking New York. As a result, it caused one of the great panics in American history. Event. So do Martians actually exist? Scientists, of course, thought it was highly unlikely. But with the technology of the time, they couldn't produce any evidence to prove that Martians didn't exist. So it wasn't until the advent of space probes, with the arrival of the space age, that humanity truly got a clear view of Mars. In 1960, the Soviet Union launched the first series of Mars probes in human history, codenamed the Martian program. This mission included two probes, Martian 1 and Martian 2. Unfortunately, both launches failed. The fourth stage of the rocket malfunctioned shortly after liftoff, and it ultimately crashed in Siberia. The second time, the rocket went out of control during its flight and eventually disintegrated in the atmosphere. However, in the field of space exploration, failures are quite normal. All the major spacefaring nations have experienced various kinds of failures, but at that time, it was the height of the space race between the US and the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union failed, the United States seized the opportunity to catch up. On October 28, 1964, NASA successfully launched the Mariner 4 Mars probe. This probe became humanity's first to fly by Mars and capture images of the planet. It took a total of 22 photos, giving us our first close-up look at the Martian surface. Interestingly, the first image of Mars we received was a color crayon drawing. In 1965, during Mariner 4's first flyby of Mars, it sent back the first set of the image data from Mars. But in that era, we didn't have the high-definition color photos of today. The probe transmitted back strings of numerical code. This required a real-time data translator to convert the data into rows of numbers, printed line by line on paper tape. At the time, it took the computer about 8 hours to process each image. The NASA engineers were so excited, they couldn't wait for the computer to process it. So, they took the paper strips with the printed numbers and taped them side by side on a wall. Each number corresponded to a color. Then, like a color by numbers painting, they manually colored in the numbers. And just like that, the first image of Mars in human history wasn't rendered on a computer, but was drawn bit by bit with colored pencils by a group of engineers. Besides the photos, Mariner 4 also studied Mars's atmosphere and magnetic field, conducted measurements. Overall, the findings of Mariner 4 essentially dispelled the rumors about Martians. Compared to Earth, Mars's atmosphere is much thinner. Its surface is very similar to the Moon's, covered with numerous impact craters. It's a desolate landscape, with no signs of life discovered. We can't launch probes to Mars whenever we want. To save fuel and time, we must wait until Earth and Mars are in their optimal positions. That is the best time to launch a probe. This opportunity occurs approximately every 26 months. In 1971, Earth once again reached a Mars exploration launch window. During this short 21-day window, the United States and the Soviet Union launched a total of 5 probes designed to orbit Mars. The Soviet probes included Mars 2, Mars 3, and Cosmos 419. The American probes were Mariner 8 and Mariner 9. These 5 probes all journeyed towards Mars. On October 14, 1971, the American probe Mariner 9, which was launched later, was the first to enter Mars's orbit. A few days later, the Soviet probes Mars 2 and Mars 3 also successfully entered Mars's orbit. In the end, only these 3 probes successfully achieved orbit. However, during the subsequent exploration phase, both the American and Soviet probes encountered a problem. The Martian surface was experiencing a massive dust storm. Mars has a very thin atmosphere, so its temperatures are extremely varied. If a person were to stand on the Martian surface during the day, the ground temperature at their feet could reach over 20 degrees Celsius, but just about a meter off the ground. For instance, at their head, they might be in air that is tens of degrees below zero. It is precisely this extreme temperature difference that can trigger dust storms on Mars. The dust storms on Mars are terrifying. The wind speeds can reach 180 meters per second, which is equivalent to a Category 12 typhoon on Earth. Moreover, a single dust storm can last for several months. These 3 probes all endured until the dust storm subsided. Among them, the American Mariner 9 performed exceptionally well, capturing and transmitting 7,329 images of the Martian surface. Its photography covered 85% of the Martian surface. It captured images of the enormous volcanoes and canyons on Mars, and even photographed Mars's moons. From then on, humanity's understanding of Mars reached a new level. But people could still only observe Mars from a distance, through photographs. Scientists hoped that if only they could land a probe on Mars, it would be great. So with this hope, 2 years later, humanity awaited the 1973 Mars launch window. In 1973, the Soviet Union launched 4 Mars probes at once. Mars 4, Mars 5, Mars 6, and Mars 7. The fates of these 4 probes varied. Mars 4 failed to enter orbit and was lost. Mars 5 successfully entered orbit, but malfunctioned 9 days later. None of the 4 probes launched by the Soviet Union was lost. Mars 7 lost contact with the Soviet Union during its landing attempt. It most likely crashed directly onto Mars. So, of the 4 probes, only Mars 6 successfully landed on the Martian surface, but contact was lost just 1 second later. In other words, it lost contact almost as soon as it landed. So do you think this counts as a success or a failure? If you say it's a failure, it did indeed land on the Martian surface. But if you say it's a success, it lost contact before doing anything. So after all that effort, produced a satisfactory result. Meanwhile, what was the United States doing? They did nothing. Instead, they waited patiently, biding their time for the 1975 launch window. In 1975, the United States launched Viking 1 and Viking 2. Both of these probes successfully landed on the surface of Mars. Humanity could finally conduct on-site exploration of Mars. Just a few minutes after landing, Viking 1 took and transmitted back an image of the Martian surface. Humanity's understanding of Mars's terrain and atmosphere grew ever deeper. And from then on, the Soviet Union gradually withdrew from the Mars exploration race. After the Soviet Union's withdrawal, America's exploration of Mars also became less aggressive. It wasn't that America's enthusiasm for Mars exploration had waned. Rather, without a competitor, there was less pressure. At this point, they were no longer thinking about who was faster or who would get to Mars first. Instead, they were thinking about how to obtain something on Mars of real scientific value. So from this point on, human exploration of Mars entered a period of dormancy. It wasn't until 1998 that NASA launched another probe. The probe launched this time was called the Mars Global Surveyor. It carried many scientific instruments to survey the entirety of Mars. This time, it made a very important discovery. On the surface of Mars, it discovered numerous channels formed by flowing water. These channels were the very features that 100 years earlier had mistaken for canals. This indicated that liquid water must have flowed on Mars in the past. In 2003, the European Space Agency, ESA, launched the Beagle 2 Mars lander. Near the North Pole of Mars, at the bottom of an unnamed crater, it discovered what appeared to be frozen water ice. On July 7th of that year, NASA also launched the Opportunity and Spirit Mars rovers. These two rovers were sent to land on opposite sides of Mars. What you are seeing now is footage of the Opportunity rover landing on Mars. After the spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere, it rapidly deployed its parachute. Then, as the spacecraft neared the ground, surrounding airbags would inflate. Upon landing, it would bounce at least 26 times. Through this method, the Opportunity rover was released onto the Martian surface. Opportunity landed in a place called Meridiani Planum. In this region, scientists discovered a type of sediment that typically only forms in the presence of water. Therefore, scientists speculated that this area may have once been wet. The Opportunity rover's camera is at a height of about 1.5 meters. And since it can move, the footage captured by Opportunity is very close to the view a human would see while standing on Mars. Spirit's landing site was Gusev Crater. Scientists suspected that this area may have once been a lake. Although these two rovers were very far apart, their objective was the same: to find water on Mars. According to the plan, these two rovers were only required to work on Mars for 90 days before retirement. But no one expected that Spirit would last for 6 years on Mars. In 2009, it became stuck in sand, its wheels unable to get free. Ultimately, NASA lost contact with Spirit in 2010. And Opportunity incredibly lasted on Mars for nearly 15 years, from 2004 to 2018. Opportunity traveled a total of 45 kilometers. Although 45 kilometers may not sound like much in an extreme environment like Mars, it is a remarkable achievement. It climbed hills, crossed deserts, explored craters, and discovered many water-related minerals. On June 10, 2018, it succumbed to a Martian dust storm, losing contact with NASA forever. On August 4, 2007, NASA launched the Phoenix Mars lander. It landed near the Martian North Pole in 2008. Using its robotic arm, it dug beneath the soil and uncovered high-purity water ice. When Phoenix heated these water ice samples, its onboard detection instruments captured the signal of water vapor. This confirmed that there really is water on Mars. However, this water is not in liquid form. From this, scientists deduced that water did indeed exist on the Martian surface in the past, and the environment was more habitable than it is today. But did life ever truly exist on Mars? We still don't know. On October 26, 2011, NASA launched the Curiosity Mars rover. This rover weighs 900 kilograms, equivalent to the weight of a small car. The airbag landing method used by previous rovers like Opportunity, while simple and effective and low cost, was completely unsuitable for Curiosity because it was too heavy. This led to the development of a new technology called the sky crane. Inside the back shell, directly above the rover, is a powerful retrorocket backpack. With 8 engines, the thrusters point towards the ground. When the probe is about 1.8 kilometers from the surface, the rocket backpack will activate to control the descent speed. When it is about 20 meters from the ground, the rocket backpack will hover in mid-air. Using 3 7.5-meter long steel cables, it will slowly lower the rover. A data cable is lowered at the same time. Once the rover's wheels touch the ground, it will quickly sever the connecting cables, allowing the rocket backpack to fly away freely and crash about 650 meters away. To avoid interfering with the rover through this method, Curiosity was released onto the Martian surface. Curiosity's power system is also a significant improvement over Opportunity's. Previous rovers used solar panels for power. Once it encounters a cloudy day or a dust storm, the power is depleted very quickly. But Curiosity is the first rover to use an RTG for power. As we've mentioned before, This is a type of nuclear generator. Voyager 1 and 2 are powered by this same technology. It can provide continuous power to Curiosity for about 14 years, independent of sunlight, even during a Martian dust storm. It allows the rover to operate normally. Curiosity's landing site is within Gale Crater. Scientists speculate that this crater was formed approximately 3.7 billion years ago. At that time, it was a lake. After billions of years of wind erosion, most of the sediment here has been blown away, leaving only a 5-kilometer-high mountain. For NASA, Mount Sharp presented the next challenge, figuring out how to get Curiosity to climb this mountain. They combined data from orbiter imagery with photos sent back by Curiosity to create a 3D terrain map. They carefully studied every possible route. Although every route had risks, the scientists ultimately identified a path to the summit. And along this path, it would also pass several locations of scientific interest. The first destination was Yellowknife Bay. The terrain here appeared to be composed of sediment, like the remnants of an ancient lake bed. After analysis, scientists concluded that a significant amount of water was once present here. This was Curiosity's first major discovery on Mars. After passing through Yellowknife Bay, Curiosity officially began its journey towards Mount Sharp, starting a 2-year-long trek. First, it passed through a place called the Kimberley Formation. Curiosity stopped here to take numerous photos and conduct analyses. The results from the sediment found here once again proved the past presence of water. Subsequently, Curiosity arrived at Garden City. This is an exposed rock outcrop. As you can see, the rock has many of these thick mineral veins. Scientists theorize that these veins were formed by minerals from early groundwater that flowed along rock fractures and then deposited. Curiosity conducted detailed analysis of these mineral veins and transmitted the data back to Earth for geologists to study the history of Martian groundwater. Here, Curiosity also captured the sunset on Mars. Unlike sunsets on Earth, the Martian sunset is blue. Scientists explain this is because of the way the Martian atmosphere scatters sunlight. This image was taken by Curiosity at a place called Whale Rock. The photo was taken. The clearly visible crossbedding in the rock indicates that it once experienced flowing water. After leaving Whale Rock, Curiosity arrived at a region which is different from Earth's. Red light is scattered as it passes through the atmosphere. The Bagnall Dunes, while blue light penetrates the Martian atmosphere more easily. Therefore, the most Martian sunset among them appears to have a slightly chilly feeling, which is about 4 meters high. This is the first time in human history that we have closely studied sand dunes on another planet. Curiosity was extremely cautious when crossing the dunes, because the Spirit rover got stuck in a sand trap and never got out. After crossing the Bagnall Dunes, Curiosity arrived at the Knocklift Plateau. At the entrance to the Knocklift Plateau, there are two tall sedimentary rock pillars. After Curiosity passed between them, it reached the Murray Buttes. When this photo was taken, it was Curiosity's 4th anniversary on Mars. After leaving the Murray Buttes, Curiosity continued its journey along the slopes of Mount Sharp. Before long, it encountered another peculiar hill, called Irison Hill. This hill is about 5 meters high and stands out prominently in the Martian wasteland. After crossing this hill, Curiosity arrived at a dune field called the Ogunquit Beach. The sand dunes here are very unique, with large ripples and small ripples intertwined. This combination is not found on Earth. This is currently the strangest sand dune scientists have studied. After crossing the Ogunquit sandfield, Curiosity arrived at the Vera Rubin Ridge. Viewed from a distance, the rocks on this ridge are layered one on top of the other. However, from this distance, it's not yet possible to determine whether they were formed by water flow or by wind erosion. Curiosity needed to get closer. As Curiosity slowly climbed Vera Rubin Ridge, scientists discovered that the rock structures here were shaped by wind erosion. Furthermore, because these rocks are harder than the surrounding strata and more resistant to erosion, they have formed some unique landforms. Some peculiar landforms have been formed. When Curiosity reached the highest point of the ridge, looking out from here, the entire Gale crater came into view. In the distance is the northern rim of the crater, and behind it is the 5-kilometer-high Mount Sharp. In June 2018, a global dust storm engulfed the entire planet of Mars. It was during this dust storm that the Opportunity rover lost contact with Earth. Before Opportunity completely lost contact, the last message NASA received was, "My battery is low, and it's getting dark." Meanwhile, the location where Curiosity was relatively less affected. It captured the Martian skies. Dramatic change over just 3 days. From clear to dim, with sunlight almost completely blocked by dust. After the dust storm ended, Curiosity, at the foothills of Mount Sharp, discovered a clay-bearing unit. This area may hold more clues about water on Mars. While en route to this area, it also took a selfie. Using the camera on its robotic arm, it took 57 photos. Then, NASA engineers stitched these 57 photos together into a single composite image. Finally, the robotic arm was removed from the image, leaving behind a perfect, full-body shot that looks as if it were taken by someone else. When Curiosity entered this clay-bearing unit, it drilled a hole here for sample analysis. The results showed that the clay minerals found here are, to date, the highest concentration ever discovered on Mars. This indicates that in the early history of Mars, there was significant liquid water activity here. Currently, Curiosity is still operational. As of August 1st, 2025, Curiosity has been on Mars for 4,616 Martian sols, which is equivalent to 4,743 Earth days, or 12 years and 360 days. However, Curiosity is not the only protagonist in the story of Mars exploration. On July 30th, 2020, NASA launched the Perseverance rover to Mars. This rover's appearance is very similar to Curiosity's, but its onboard equipment has been upgraded. For example, It is the first to be equipped with a sample catching system. It will store the collected samples in a sealed tube for future return to Earth. It also carries the MOXIE experiment, an instrument that can, from Mars' carbon dioxide atmosphere, extract a small amount of oxygen. It also carries a small helicopter named Ingenuity. And on April 19, 2021, this small helicopter successfully completed its first flight, proving that in Mars' very thin atmosphere, flight is possible. In addition to the equipment upgrades, Perseverance's mission objectives are also different from Curiosity's. Curiosity's mission is to study the Martian environment and climate, and to assess Mars' habitability. Perseverance's mission, however, is to search for signs of life on Mars, and to collect samples for future return to Earth. On February 18, 2021, Perseverance landed in Jezero crater. Scientists believe this was once a lake. The sediments here may have preserved fossilized traces of life. In just the first 3 months of its mission, Perseverance had already taken over 70,000 photos, recorded multiple audio clips from Mars, filmed 4 videos of Ingenuity's flights, and also captured a severe dust storm on Mars, observing hundreds of dust devils like this one. This dust storm kicked up dust over an area of about 4 square kilometers. This is the first time humans on Mars have used a camera to capture the entire process of strong winds lifting dust. In July 2024, Perseverance in Jezero crater discovered a rock with a very peculiar appearance. NASA named it Shayava Falls, after a waterfall in the Grand Canyon in the United States. The surface of this rock is covered with circular spots of varying light and dark colors, much like a leopard's spots. Thus, it is also called the leopard print rock. Perseverance in this rock detected organic compounds. These organic compounds are essential components of life as we know it. That is to say, billions of years ago, this area may have been inhabited by many microorganisms. However, this hypothesis requires further analysis and verification. In order to bring these rock samples back to Earth for analysis, Perseverance is now in the process of packaging these samples. As of July 2025, of the 43 sample tubes it carries, 33 have already been filled with precious materials from Mars. For these already packaged samples, NASA will collaborate with ESA with a plan in the 2030s to use a rocket to bring the Mars samples back to Earth. On July 23, 2020, the Long March 5Y4 carrier rocket, carrying the Tianwen-1 Mars probe, was successfully launched. On May 15, 2021, the Zhurong rover successfully landed in the southern part of Utopia Planitia on Mars. China also became, after the United States, the second country to successfully deploy a rover on the surface of Mars. From the first Mars probe to the present day, humans have launched a total of about more than 40 Mars probes. But the success rate is only about 40%. The others were either lost in space or crashed. Even the probes that successfully landed on Mars faced various difficulties. The terrain of Mars is very complex. To cope with these situations, scientists have added many functions to Zhurong's mobility system. Many functions. It can not only travel in a straight line, but also turn while moving. It can also turn in place if it encounters some larger obstacles that make turning difficult for the rover. We also designed a function for it called crab walking. This means that all 6 wheels can be turned sideways allowing it to move sideways like a crab if it gets stuck in sandy terrain. It can also inch forward slowly. Although the inching is very slow, it is very effective for getting unstuck. Zhurong's designed lifespan was 90 Martian sols, which is about 93 Earth days. However, on the surface of Mars, it lasted for 347 Martian sols, which is almost 1 Earth year. On May 20th, 2022, Zhurong entered hibernation mode to endure the approaching Martian winter and a large dust storm. It was originally scheduled to restart on December 26, 2022. However, due to the extremely low temperatures and dust accumulation exceeding expectations, it failed to wake up. This means Zhurong may remain in a permanent slumber on Mars. NASA is currently conducting a long-term Mars living simulation experiment called CHOPIA. On Earth, they have built a highly realistic Mars habitat. Why conduct such an experiment? It is actually in preparation for future crewed missions to Mars. Mars is incredibly far from Earth. As we mentioned at the beginning, the average distance is about 225 million kilometers. The fastest speed of current human-crewed spacecraft can reach 10.5 kilometers per second. But even at such speeds, a round trip would take 1 to 2 years. To ensure that astronauts in a long-term, confined, and high-risk environment can still work healthily, NASA must understand the long-term effects of isolation on the human body and mind, and what kind of impact it will have. Also, food and supplies. Can they achieve self-sufficiency? How is astronaut productivity in such a resource-limited environment? What about work efficiency? And so on, a series of questions. The Mars habitat that NASA has built is in Texas, at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The area is approximately 158 square meters. The construction method used 3D printing technology. If we were to actually build a base on Mars in the future, the same method would be used. Inside there are bedrooms, a workshop, a laboratory, a greenhouse, a fitness area, and so on. The external environment simulates the sandy and rocky terrain of Mars. The experiment will also incorporate challenges specific to Mars, such as communication delays, simulating the approximately 20-minute communication delay between Mars and Earth. There are also resource limitations, strictly limiting food, water, and energy supplies. There are also emergency drills, such as equipment failure or medical emergencies, among other scenarios. This experiment is divided into 3 phases. The first phase has now concluded. The duration was from June 25, 2023 to July 6, 2024. There were 4 volunteers. Note that these 4 individuals are not professional astronauts. They lived here for 378 days, living and working as if they were truly on Mars, eating and conducting experiments. The 4 volunteers for the second phase have now been confirmed. The experiment will officially begin in October of this year. In this experiment, NASA will introduce more complex mission scenarios, such as longer extravehicular activities and stricter resource constraints, among others. The start date for the 3rd phase of the experiment is projected to be in either 2026 or 2027. Volunteer registration has not yet begun. However, I looked at the requirements for these volunteers, and they are quite stringent. With the criteria for selecting actual astronauts are quite similar. First, you must be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. Then, the age requirement is between 30 and 55 years old. Then, next, you need to have a considerable professional background and skills. Either you have 1,000 or more hours of jet flight experience, or at least 2 years in STEM. That is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics experience in these fields. Then, physical fitness is also crucial. You must pass NASA's long-duration flight mission astronaut physical examination. Then, regarding educational requirements, either a master's degree in a STEM field or in a SAINT, having completed 2 years of study in a doctoral program, or a Doctor of Medicine. So to be blunt, this is not about experiencing life. Instead, it is to conduct a year-long, high-intensity scientific experiment. These experiments will help NASA find the best way for humans to live long-term on Mars. To pave the way for future Mars astronauts and reduce their challenges, we have always been looking forward to the future of humanity, truly establishing the human settlement on Mars, colonizing Mars, or just using it as a stepping stone. It's good to be able to go to more distant space. If this really comes to fruition in the future, when we each ask about each other's hometowns, perhaps we will really hear that phrase, "Are you from Mars?" Thank you for watching the Space Lens, exploring the mysteries of the universe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to join us on the next journey through space.